If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good. And Mike, today we are so honored to have on the line with us from New York City, New York, Laura Wright Treadway, who's a New York City-based journalist with OnEarth magazine. She's just written a brilliant article called Pure Chemistry. She's also OnEarth magazine's favorite science geek. Welcome to Green is Good, Laura.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Hey, Laura, what a great article your latest article, Pure Chemistry, is in OnEarth magazine. I've read it. Mike and I love the magazine, and to us, it's sort of just an extension of what we do here on Is Green is Good, is spread the word of what's going on and hopefully enlighten and educate our listeners, not only here in the United States, but around the world. As I shared with you all fair a little bit before we went on, we've had Jeffrey Hollander on the show from Seventh Generation on this issue of chemistry in our household goods. Tell us, how did you come to write this article, and what was the interest that you had in it?
Well, there were a couple of things that came into play. There was a lot of interest in this topic at the magazine. There has been for some time now, and as I'm sure your listeners know, consumer awareness has been growing over the past several years when it comes to chemicals, not only in the environment, but in the things we eat and drink and put on our bodies and give our kids to play with. So we were really tuned in to this growing consumer awareness that's out there now. And at the same time, we're also really tuned into the fact that other countries, and not just countries, but all of Europe and our northern neighbors, Canada, they are all really pretty significantly ahead of us when it comes to keeping these things out of our products, our food, and our bodies ultimately. So that was really what drove us to want to do this story. Right.
And, the article, and for our listeners out there, please go read Laura's article. It's brilliant. www.onearth.org. It's called Pure Chemistry. It's right on the landing page. Laura, talk a little bit about the push-pull of the American corporation, who historically hasn't been forced to be transparent with regards to the products that they produce in terms of safeness and toxicology, and the sort of green revolution, sustainability revolution, and the pressures that they feel now. How are they balancing this act, and where do you see this today, and where do you see this movement going?
Well, as I said before, a lot of this comes from consumer pressure, people just knowing a lot more, and a lot of the companies out there are really tuned into this now. And there's been a lot of push to people pressuring companies that sell cleaning products, for example, to put on the label what really is in there. And so they've been hearing a lot of people saying, I want to know what's going on the floors that my kid crawls on. And so that has led companies like Clorox and Procter & Gamble and S.C. Johnson that make all of these brand name products that line all of the shelves in the major retailers out there to find ways to disclose what's in there. And that may sound small, but it's really an important starting point, because there's so much that we don't know about the safety of all of these individual ingredients. So just getting the information out there in the public realm has been a good first starting point for a lot of these companies. But so then, there's also the fact that you don't really want to come out and say, hey, yeah, we know that there's a problem with our products and we're going to make them better now, because that really, that says that you knew that there was something that was not so great all along. So there's really a lot of tension here, and a lot of companies have expressed concern over confidential business information. They don't want to give away their recipes and their secrets for their wonderful best-selling cleaning product. So it has been kind of a bumpy road to get to where we are now, and there certainly will be some bumps going forward, but we're at least right now at a point where things seem to be progressing and moving in a direction that's good for the environment and for people.
Well, that's certainly good to hear and very heartening news. But Laura, I just have a question addressing what you had mentioned at the outset, the fact that our neighbors in Europe, European countries, and our Canadian neighbors seem to be ahead of the curve, or at least ahead of the U.S. on this. Let me ask you, was that fostered by a consumer movement, consumers asking questions and demanding more responsibility from companies, or how exactly did that go? Or was that more a government organizational push?
it was, to the extent of my knowledge, it was a little bit of both. That certainly consumer pressure came into the picture, but also just sort of there's a different sort of culture, particularly in Europe, when it comes to looking at preventing problems before they arise as opposed to solving them afterwards. So governmentally, there's a different approach, and it just created an environment that was a little more hospitable to this way of thinking about the products that we manufacture and consume as individuals.
Well, let's give the audience a little bit of some of the wow numbers that you uncovered when you were writing this great article called Pure Chemistry. Talk a little bit about how many chemicals are all around us, and how many of these chemicals, are on the market today, and how many have been tested for safety.
That is a good question. So there are about 82,000 chemicals that are registered and approved for manufacturing today.
Okay.
Some are produced in vast quantities, some in smaller amounts, but still the number is really significant. And the number of those that were registered with some sort of safety information is surprisingly small. It's only about 3,300.
Wow.
So, that has a lot to do with the fact that we didn't really even think much about this at all until the late 70s. And at that point, we already had something in the range of 60,000 chemicals in production at the time. And so those were all just kind of given a free pass. And since then, those that have been registered for production, then the 3,300 number amounts to only about 15% of those that were registered with some sort of safety information.
So today, are there laws in place regulating these chemicals, or that part of this evolution that we're talking about today?
There is a law. There's one law called the Toxic Substances Control Act. It's a bit of a mouthful. It was passed in 1976.
Okay. Right
around when, on the tail end of when a lot of environmental laws were being put on the books, the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And those bedrock environmental laws have done wonders to clean up the air and the water. And at the time, when people started to think about how about all these other chemicals and the products we produce, people sort of felt as though the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, we were really covering our bases in terms of the types of pollution that would affect human health and environmental health. But it just didn't really occur to people that once you put these chemicals into plastic toys and TV sets, that they might actually get back out and get into our bodies. It wasn't a matter of dumping into the environment. It was something more insidious and less expected. So there is a law, but it's out of date, and there's some pressure to update it now for sure.
Well, it's funny because, Laura, you say that you talk about the numbers of chemicals that are out there and in common use today, but quoting from your article, today the Centers for Disease Control routinely test Americans' blood for the presence of 219 classes of chemicals as part of the annual National Health and Nutritional Examination Survey. Other studies, you go on to say, have detected as many as 493 chemicals in our blood.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing
it's
number.
Really shocking, isn't it?
Well, one thing, Laura, that I love about your article is you talk about solutions and who's on the cutting edge of solutions and who's doing what. And that's what's so great about your article called Pure Chemistry. Talk a little bit about the gaps. You've already mentioned now the gaps of how many chemicals are out there, how many have been really tested, what we really don't know in the marketplace, but who's now on the cutting edge of being solution-based. And talk a little bit about your what you uncovered about the University of California, Berkeley, and their Center for Green Chemistry, and what that really means for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There is a lot of reason to be hopeful, and not just to bury your head in the sand when thinking about this topic. I came across a lot of people who are really doing fascinating and important work to try and change things, and the University of California at Berkeley is one such place where they're taking the idea of building chemicals that are benign from the outset and taking it to another level. And I'll just start by saying that green chemistry has been growing over the past 10 years or so, and green chemistry refers to but creating chemicals that are benign by design, that are not going to wreak havoc on our delicate balance of proteins and hormones and everything that makes us tick. So they're taking this concept and they're saying, we want not only chemists to know how to do this, to design smarter, but we want the business people who will be marketing and selling these products the public health officials who will be helping to design regulations for these things. We want everyone to know how the process should work going forward. And so they've got several different schools there that are all working together to try to advance a new way of thinking about the way we design molecules and ultimately the products we buy.
You know, Laura, these two fascinating examples in your article with regards to benign by design, and can you please give that 1% example that you gave in your article to our listeners, why it's so critical that this next generation of students are learning to design and chemists are learning to design by design?
There's an example that was given to me by an executive at Dow Chemical of a product that they were looking to develop internally. They wanted to build this super plastic, and they'd made a great deal of progress and spent many millions of dollars developing it, and eventually it got to the phase where they were testing it for safety. And they discovered in their studies that about 1% of the population was seriously allergic to this stuff. And when you think about what 1% of the human population means, that's many millions of people. And they knew right away that they couldn't take it any further, that they had to stop right there and, just say this is a wash. And that's a big loss for them in terms of research and development time, as well as a lot of money. And you do that over and over again, and it really starts to hurt your bottom line. So, that's just one example of where a major company is starting to see how this way of thinking can really help, and to hire a chemist who is trained to think about how a molecule might function once it gets into the human body, what sort of reactions might go on based on the chemical structure. You save yourself a lot of time and money by not even developing something that you already could say, I know that there's something that looks like this molecule that's very toxic. Let's just not even develop that. So that's the way of thinking that ultimately saves time and money for major companies.
Well, it's amazing, too, because, again, that goes back to what you stated at the beginning about European nations and our Canadian neighbors, too. Just the mindset of problem solving by thinking ahead and what can go wrong with this picture. And let's solve that problem now before we get started.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also talk a little bit about, explain again the green chemistry issue. What does really green chemistry mean for our students out there and our young entrepreneurs out there, and also our big executives out there? Green chemistry, the importance of green chemistry as a future trend.
There are a lot of reasons why green chemistry is really important as a future trend.
Okay.
When the two sort of pioneers of the field set out to advance this new way of thinking, they weren't just thinking about making chemicals that are benign by design. They were also thinking about all of the waste that comes with designing molecules. You could just as easily make something in 2 steps rather than 12, and that means you've got a lot of savings there, and that's green chemistry at work. You're finding ways to cut steps out of the process. You save time and money in that way and resources. And so it's one component of the whole, which helps to not only save money in the end when we're talking about cleaning up our messes, but also, time and effort as well.
Right. And when you were talking about UC Berkeley in your article, you talked about the multidisciplinary approach and program that they have. Talk a little bit about what the word I saw for the first time in your article, pioneer. What does the word Bioneer mean with regards to green chemistry and the article that you've written?
The pioneers are best known for their annual conference, which brings together lots of different sustainability-minded folks to talk about cutting-edge ideas within the field of the environment and sustainability.
Right.
And they, last year, had one of the founders of green chemistry come to talk about this growing trend and what it means going forward and why it's so important. And so it's been kind of an incubator for helping this idea to continue to grow and gain momentum. And through that, increasingly, there's been more and more consumer awareness of what's going on and what the better alternatives could be.
Got it. And now, you gave the example about the new super plastic that was designed but negatively affected 1% of the population, and therefore it was scrapped. Talk a little bit, sustainability. Mike and I always talk about with our guests, the three tenets of sustainability: people, planet, and profits. Talk a little bit about when you now use green chemistry and also benign by design programs, these big companies like Dow and other great companies, how does that positively affect their bottom lines?
Well, one example is I spoke a good deal to someone from Staples, and Staples not only sells paper and pencils to regular old consumers like you and me, but they also have a very large business-to-business branch that serves about 65% of all Fortune 100 companies, and that supplies them with all the cleaning products and janitorial supplies that they need to run their huge complexes. And over the past few years, Staples has developed a Sustainable Earth by Staples line that has been growing considerably among their business clients. They get requests from customers saying that we want to use your products, but we don't want such and such chemicals. They'll provide a list of the things that they know that they do not want in those products. And some of them are things that consumers are already really aware of, like BPA, which became famous over the past few years for its presence in baby bottles and sport bottles, and the fact that it can leach out and it's now being found in people. So they're saying to their suppliers at the outset, we'll take your products, but we don't want them if they have these nasty chemicals. And so it's really a great business opportunity for those who are getting in on the game.
So you're saying it's good for the bottom line because it's also a good sales tool to be more transparent about what really is the chemicals that these folks are using.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit, talking about that. Mike and I had two shows with Jeffrey Hollander from Seventh Generation on, and Mike and I were literally fascinated and hung on every word that he said. Our listeners were also responded so well to those two shows. Talk a little bit about gaps in the marketplace and, growing and new companies that have filled some of those gaps, like Method and Seventh Generation. You want to share what you've learned about them?
Absolutely. So Seventh Generation is a really good example of a company that has stepped up and really built itself up to take advantage of this growing consumer awareness about the things that are being put into the products that we use. They are now found on grocery store shelves everywhere. You really can't go into many stores in New York City and not find them at this point. And I listened to someone from Seventh Generation recently talking about this question of confidential business information and the idea that there are these great industry trade secrets when it comes to our cleaning products. And he was really saying that, anyone who has the right equipment can kind of figure out what's in your product. So it's not such a great secret anymore. You can find out if you really want to. So at this point, they're already out there in the market taking advantage of the fact that people want these products. They're being transparent about what's in their ingredients, and they're helping to push the rest of the market to move in that direction.
Talk a little bit about what you feel about the future then. You've seen now a snapshot. You've written about the snapshot of where we are, and with Berkeley, working on this. Are other colleges going to take Berkeley's approach and create these multidisciplinary programs? Or, what do you feel like both with regards to corporate, the global brands that represent the corporate world and learning institutions like UC Berkeley?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there's a lot of great momentum right now. There are several schools out there that are already taking green chemistry by the horns and really promoting it among chemists. And the hope is that because Berkeley is now taking this multidisciplinary approach, and also because Berkeley is such a powerhouse in the field of chemistry, that it'll begin to catch on in the minds of others, that others will begin to say, we can do this too. And so, although I don't know of other multidisciplinary centers off the top of my head, I wouldn't be surprised if others crop up within the next few years. It's really something that seems to be growing rapidly now. And as far as major corporations are concerned, one thing that I want to mention that seems like it's evidence of this growing consumer movement is something called the Good Guide, which your listeners may know. But it's one of several databases out there where you can go in and you can look up a product that you might want to buy or a product category that you're interested in, and it'll give you information on that product, how much information is out there in terms of its safety, and they'll give you a product score for it, so you have a sense for whether or not it's something that it's good to bring into your home or really a terrible thing, and you can find an alternative. But what's impressive to me about this is just the numbers. They have about 700,000 visitors every month, and that's a significant and growing number. And they're now beginning to talk with major online retailers about having their ratings pop up alongside products when you go to buy them online. So there's increasing pressure for companies to do the right thing, and they're responding. From talking to people at the Good Guide, they get calls from companies that are really nervous when their products don't get good rankings, and they want to know how to improve it.
Hey,
their marketing really depends on a lot of this now.
Laura, that's a brilliant point and a great resource. I want you to pause there and give a shout out. What is Mike and I don't have that Good Guide here. Why don't you share with our listeners what's the URL for the Good Guide?
I believe it is goodguide.org.
Perfect. So our listeners to access Good Guide, GUIDE.org. That's such a great and important part. And you say it's building 700,000 visitors a month now?
That's what it's got at the moment. And from speaking with them, it sounds like they're growing pretty rapidly. So it's a great resource, and one that I turn to on a pretty regular basis. I have their Droid app on my phone, and I use it, I would say, a couple times a week when I go shopping.
Laura, John, while you two were talking, I went and I searched it. It's actually goodguide.com, and it is there. And it's, John, this is really fabulous. Laura, thanks so much for sharing this with our listeners, because
Thanks,
there it is. It's got the ratings, and these are common products. I mean, I see on the top right now, dishwashing liquid, peanut butter, even car washes. It's amazing.
It really is. I use it constantly. I mean, whatever it is you're looking for, you can find baby products, televisions. I looked up my new refrigerator. I'm not sure what I found off the top of my head, but there's a lot on there.
That's perfect. So for our listeners, again, as Mike just pointed out, go to the goodguide.com to learn, how the products you're using are rated. Laura, we're down to the last minute or so. Your final thoughts, with regards to what you've written about and where we are. You do such great work, and you get to, look into such fascinating issues. I love to always ask our guests, you feel hopeful? You feel hopeless? Where do you feel right now with regards to the issue of chemistry and what the products that we use?
I have to say I feel hopeful. It took me a while to get there. This was a lot of intense reporting, but in the end, the people that I met at Berkeley and the executives that I spoke with who are interested in sustainability at these companies, they really are doing the best that they can to, make the products that we buy safer down the road. So I believe that we're on a path that will get us to a better place.
Well, that's so great. And, Laura, when you write more for your great publication, and again, for our listeners out there, and the NRDC's OnEarth magazine, and you could reference it at www.onearth.org, OnEarth.org. You could read Laura's latest article called Pure Chemistry. Laura Wright Treadway, you're not only your magazine's favorite science geek, you're now our favorite science geek here at Green is Good. And thank you for making Green is Good.